Diko nasara wishne he. Shichon ishilchon ani hunko. Sultan Reed gulzeshen. Amit arego humbon ago the jingo. Go banisha. In Sinko benashadi, the rejo the Leo benashara. Awa ko nasara wishne ganiko. My name is Anthony Belvado. I'm with the San Carlos Apache out of Arizona. What I do, what I make, it dates back to the 1800s. If you can see in this poster behind me, it tells the whole story of who we were. Among the Apache bands, the Western Apaches were known for their fiddle maker. San Carlos and White Mountain Apaches make the fiddle. When I first got interested back in high school, I seen somewhat a photograph of an Apache individual holding something, just like from this poster behind me. And I was intrigued on that. Really wanted to know what was that he was holding. And going through some research, come to find out my grandfather, Sultan Reed Sr., made these instruments. And I approached him, and he instructed me in different phases, not completely, but a lot of this my style that I have is from trial and error on my part. And I approached him one morning, and he invited me into his house, and I showed him that book of the individual holding whatever he was holding. I didn't know at that time. And he had a little grin on him, and he told me, Shicho, Diko nai tiklihi, Tse wada atle, Gulzehi nai inko. Simply meeting my grandson in this photograph. It shows this individual holding an Apache fiddle. In our language, it's called Tsehore Atle, simply meaning wood that sing or singing wood. And I asked him if he would teach me. And without hesitation, he told me, yes, I will teach you. And he instructed me of the right plant to harvest at the right moment. That was the most important thing. It's got to be harvested right at the right moment for it to carry the sound. I use every bit of the plant itself, from the base all the way to the tip. And thinking back, the very first piece I ever made, this was what he was telling me. I had a hard time for the very first piece that I made. My very first piece looked somewhat like this. And compared to my grandfather's fiddle, it differs. I have my own style of how I put it all together. And I remember putting it all together. I was so excited, putting it all together from all his instruction, and this is what it sounded like. I kept wondering, looking at it over. He did everything that he instructed me. There's horsehair, and I carved it all out, but no sound. So I went back to my grandfather, and I asked him, I made the fiddle just like you instructed me, but there's no sound coming out of it. He kind of grinned and told me, one thing you forgot, grandson. You need to go back up to the mountains and find a pinon tree and get pine pitch from the tree itself. When you get it, heat it up, melt it, it goes on your string. That's what produces the sound, which I did, and I came back. This is what it sounds like when it's completely put together with everything needed on it. It sounds just like a fiddle. Talking more about the fiddle itself, there were several different trees or stock they used, but mainly what they used was the agave. It's split in half and it's hollowed out. Back in the early days, it was held together either with a wire, a sinew, or a piece of leather. And this is what it looks like when it's completely hollowed out. And he was explaining to me that the sound itself would bounce off the wall as you play it. That's what makes the difference of how the wood was preserved and how it was harvested at the right moment, and that's how the sound really travels throughout the whole stock. The maker had a tool, which was his knife. And going back to my very first piece, I did use a knife to carve the inside out with a knife, which is carved all the way from top to bottom. It wasn't as smooth as what I do now, but the purpose of everything coming together was done with a knife. This was his drill to make the sound hole, the peg hole, whatever was needed. He would heat the metal and make holes in it from that hot metal. Wherever sound hole was needed, he would heat it up, and this was his drill. And after making the hole, he would carve in his sound holes, what shape or design he would want or needed. But a lot of times, it was just simply a lot of holes into making the sound holes. The piece that they put together look like this when it's unfinished. A lot of them you'll see with no designs on it, but it's up to the artist. And he used natural earth tone colors for his paint. This was mixed with cactus juice. And the bow itself, I did a replica of an older style. Looks just like a bow and arrow bow. And they use a lot of different material on their bows themselves too. They use sumac, acacia branch, or juniper, whatever was available where they were at. And this is the style, the early style that they made the bows from. And this is my style of the bows that I make. And it's made out of acacia branch. There's two ways in hollowing out the agave or whatever wood they use. Here I did one where it's hollowed out from the top to the bottom. It's not split and it's hollowed out. and the ends would be capped to capture the sound within the stock itself. The strings were used out of horsehair or sinew, but I use horsehair on a lot of my equipment that I make. I use all natural material. The peg holders, it's mesquite, and the peg tuners is mesquite also. I have a piece that I'm working on this moment here which is stained dark, and I remove some of the stains to show the natural color of the wood itself. And with a lot of our designs, it has to do with diamonds, lightnings, and circles, and a lot of dots. Some of the colors that I use relates to the universe itself. And it all goes back to the universe within our religion, I guess you would call. Here's another piece that I'm working on now that is almost complete. I just need a few touch-up. And this is done in crayon. I've done one in the past. I like the way it looks, and I thought I'd try this one in crayons. To me, it does. As an artist, whenever I pick up a piece, I know exactly what colors I want to use and how I want it to look. But with every artist, the design itself, it differs. Like I can tell my grandfather's work from anyone else. And what I do on my work is I try thinking out of the box, what I haven't used before. And it's hollowed out. From top to bottom. Right now there are a handful of makers back home, and to give you some example of the past makers, their names were Amos Costina, known for his fiddle making; George Starr, known for his fiddle making; Sultan Reed Sr., my grandfather, known for his fiddle making. It dates back to the 1800s, the Apache fiddle. I think of the very first individual that made one. And what he did was he went out and what he thought what he needed to make the instrument body, the string, and to decorate it, and the resin. And he took whatever was natural within the area and made the very first fiddle. I wonder how long it was, or how thick in diameter it was. How many strings did it have? The style of the bow, and what sound really came out of it. But the Apache people took it further, and the instrument was used among the Apache people for courtship. In courtship, they gave it power. I believe a lot of these in museum collection still possess the power that they have. There are songs relating to courtship. The individual would sit at a distance, whoever he was courting, and he would play his instrument and sing those songs. There are stories of how the individual would paint their face with red paint as they sang. There's stories of individual where they would put pollen on their instrument, and whoever they were courting, they would sing from a distance. This was done in secrecy. Within the next 4 days, whoever he was courting would approach them, and that's how he would get his mate. I remember the very first Indian market in Santa Fe that I attended. I had them displayed on my table, somewhat like this, and an individual approached me, and she didn't know what it was, and asked me, "Is that a bird cage?" From then I knew very little is known of this instrument. That's why I would like to teach the public the meaning behind it, of how it was used, and who the maker was. I show a lot of respect of all the instruments that I do make, because I know one time it had all that power. I would like to share my fiddle making with my grandkids. I have some grandkids that are coming up. I would like to pass it on to them so they would know. I am a third generation maker. My grandfather and his father before him, his grandparents before him, they took it all with them. They didn't share what they knew of the fiddle, but just to share what my grandfather instructed me of the fiddle itself.